Okay, so just out of interest, by a show of hands, how many people here would class how they earn a living as being within the creative industries? So photographers, developers, designers. Okay, so keep your hand up if you absolutely love your job. You go to work every day, you look forward to it, you never sit there on a Sunday and think, oh God, I wish it wasn't Monday tomorrow. Okay, good, quite a few hands down, but still a few up. The reason I ask that is because recently I've become really interested in what makes the difference between people working in the creative industries that absolutely love what they do and they earn a living from it, and people that don't like what they do so much, or they just can't find a way to earn a living. And I think there is this sort of idea that people have that we're all really lucky to work in the creative industries, and we all get and sit and we earn a living from our passion, and we get to sort of sit in a room, come up with creative ideas, and we all do what we love. But in my experience, that's not always true. And so tonight, I just want to explore a little bit more about that and why I think some of the reasons are behind it. Yeah, the clicker definitely isn't working. Okay, so at the moment, I'm working on a startup called Creative Life, which is the logo you saw at the beginning. And really the aim of it, the mission, is to help individuals working in the creative industries achieve a lifestyle they want by doing the work they love. Now, that's obviously quite an ambitious task, and there's not a sort of one-size-fits-all solution, but there are some sort of key principles and insights that we can take away, and things that we can learn that I believe can help people move closer towards that goal. And so I think, starting with my story, tell you a little bit about my journey, my experience working within the creative industries over the past few years, and sort of what I've learned. So I've always been fairly creative. I played musical instruments when I was younger. I wasn't very good, but I enjoyed doing it, and I've always been interested in art. But I went through quite a traditional schooling system, which really encouraged us to focus on real subjects like maths and English and things like that. And to be honest, it wasn't bad advice, because when I was at school, this notion of the independent artist as we know it today, it didn't really exist. There were two sort of main approaches to working in the creative industries. One was to get picked up by a big organisation, whether it was a record label or an art gallery or a big company or corporation, or sort of go it alone and hope that somehow you made it, and you get to be completely autonomous and you get to be creative on your terms, but the likelihood was you were going to be struggling and starving. And I didn't really fancy that option. I had these visions of myself being rich with a nice car and a nice house when I was older. So the path I took, I decided to go to uni and study an important sounding degree, which was computing for business. It's as important as it sounds. But I soon realised that not only was I way out of my depth and I couldn't really understand much that was going on, but actually this artistic creativity that I'd sort of been suppressing a little bit was a massive part of my life, and it was something that I really, really needed. And so luckily I managed to change to a course called New Media, which gave me a lot more creativity and creative freedom. We got to work on lots of cool projects. But there was still this underlying sense that in order to earn a living in the creative industries, really, you had to sort of make a bit of a sacrifice. You had to find a middle ground between doing what you loved and doing what made money. And so I sort of went, okay, yeah, I get that. That makes sense. When I left uni and graduated, I got offered a job at a marketing and advertising agency in London, and I thought it was the best thing since sliced bread when I first got offered it. I thought, get to work with all these really cool brands, big brands. There's a tennis table in the office. That's pretty cool. And on a Friday, we even got a thing called the Rum Shack, where you could get a rum and a Coke for £1. Can't get better than that, really, although I did sort of soon find out that drinking at work on a Friday probably wasn't the best idea, but that's a story for another time. So, you know, I went in there, I was a little bit wet behind the ears, to say the least, and I went in there, but I was keen and I was eager and I was waiting for these creative opportunities. I sort of had all these visions of basically being paid to sit in a room and come up with cool ideas. I was waiting for the CEO to come over to my desk and ask me what I thought of the latest Messi campaign, but that never quite happened. But I sort of cracked on. I forgot to mention I was a front-end web developer. That was my role, so the likelihood of that happening was probably quite low. But I knew as a graduate, you know, I wasn't going to be working on all the cool projects, but it got to the point where these tasks sort of ended up being building email templates and fixing bugs on websites that I hadn't even built and fixing other people's code and stuff. And I just thought, do you know what? Nothing's going to change here. This, again, it's not giving me that creativity that I wanted. So I decided that the best route for me was to go freelance. And I thought, well, if I have my own clients, then I've got this creative freedom. I can do what I want. So I moved back in with my parents, which for anyone who's done that knows is a great motivator to build up a portfolio and actually start earning some money. So I did that, and things were going well, and I saved up enough, and I moved back to Leeds. And in business terms, things were going pretty well. My clients were getting bigger. I was building up enough projects in order to sort of earn a living. But something still wasn't quite right. This creative itch that I had just wasn't getting met. And then I came across a book called The 4-Hour Workweek. For anyone that hasn't read it or ever heard of it, it pretty much does what it says on the tin. And it basically says that you can travel the world and not do much work and still earn money. So I thought that sounded pretty good. I thought that's maybe what my passion is, because I do like traveling. So I read that cover to cover, and I started trying to implement it in my business. And I got to a point where I thought, do you know what? I could probably actually run this business from the other side of the world. I started outsourcing most of the work. I was using freelancers from all over the world, and I was still running the business. So that's what I did. I took off with my friend Danny, who's sitting over there, and we traveled Southeast Asia. This is Singapore. They were on a roof terrace in Singapore, and we lived a pretty luxurious lifestyle, really, didn't we, mate? If we're being honest, we stayed in good hotels, which for anyone that's been to Southeast Asia knows is not particularly hard to do. But the difference was I was still earning a living while I was doing it. So I thought, well, this is pretty good. But after a while, I left down in Southeast Asia and went to New Zealand to meet some of my family, and everyone was asking me what I was doing. And I thought, I should be really passionate about this. I should be telling everyone that I'm loving my job. But really, I was a bit like, yeah, sort of build websites, and well, I don't really. I sort of get other people to do them, and then sort of, yeah, I don't know. And then I sort of realized that actually, was I actually doing what I wanted to do, or was, again, this just another vision that I had and this thing that I was following? So it wasn't until I was in Canada and I got news that someone in our family had died suddenly and fairly unexpectedly. So I came back to the UK, and the whole thing really just sort of made me think about life a little bit differently. And I started thinking, like, what do I actually want? What am I doing here? What am I chasing? And I realized that I wasn't really living my values. I didn't really have a purpose. I wasn't living passionately. I was doing things that I thought I wanted, or maybe that I thought looked good, or that society thought was success. And these words like passion, purpose, and values, they get thrown around a lot. Like, we hear them a lot. But like, what do they actually mean? And how many people actually think about them on a regular basis? So I think really, values are basically the things that are the most important things to you in the world. And oftentimes when you're faced with these external changes in your life, that's when you really think about them, and that's when you really look at things from a different perspective. So, my vision of this lifestyle was great, and it is a great lifestyle in the right context, but if what you're doing, the fundamental things about what you're doing, isn't what you care about, then it's all just a little bit fake, really. So that's sort of my experience, and I want to relate it a little bit to some sciencey stuff, because it's all very well me standing up here and telling you about my experience, but that's only one person's perspective. So there's a thing in psychology called self-determination theory, and it basically says that we've got 4 main psychological needs, or they can be broken down into those needs, and that certainty, security, connection, belonging, you can all read. And it's quite similar. Some of you might be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And Maslow referred to these needs as deficiency needs. The reason he called them that is because we only really notice them when we're not living them. So when we're not meeting these needs or fulfilling these needs, we'll notice them. I've got some references down here, just in case anyone doesn't believe it. And then, so the other thing is that depending on the order of your needs, that sort of determines like the direction that you take in life. So if you value certainty over autonomy or significance, then you've probably got like a really stable 9-to-5 job. Most people in this room probably haven't got that. They're probably a bit more, they want autonomy and significance a bit more. If you really value significance and autonomy, you're probably up on stage telling everyone about it. But he referred to these needs as deficiency needs, but then he also talked about growth needs. And the growth needs are the things that we don't necessarily meet, and they're the things that give us the fulfillment and sort of purpose and things like that. And I sort of realized that these were the things that I hadn't quite identified, and creativity was obviously a massive part of it, but there are obviously lots of other things in there that I hadn't really addressed. And that is a really hard part, is actually identifying them without just sort of sitting around thinking, what is life all day? You know, there's not an easy or obvious way to do that. But that shift in perspective was something that did allow me to do that. But we don't really want to sit around waiting for that to happen, because we don't really want to wish those events on ourselves. Because most of the time they're sort of events that we don't really want, like somebody dying or a relationship ending or something like that. So I've found one of the best ways is to imagine it. So what would you do if you had a year to live and money was no object? Now, that might seem a little bit extreme, and we don't really like talking about death, which is sort of fairly understandable. But the weird thing is, it's the only fate that we all share. It's the only thing that we all have in common. And actually, by changing our perspective and thinking about that, all of a sudden the things that are really important to us in life start to come to the surface. And one of my favorite quotes is by Steve Jobs: "Remembering that you're going to die is the best way I know of avoiding the trap of thinking you have something to lose." And Steve Jobs was famous for getting up in the mornings every day and looking at himself in the mirror and saying, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I'm doing today? And if it was no for too many days in a row, he knew that something needed to change. You can also be less morbid about it, and you can look at the peak moments in your life, the times that you were happiest, and you can find out why you were happiest. And I think that's a really, really important question. Probably one of the most important questions to ask is why you want those things. And that's something that I wasn't really asking myself enough. And in the work that I do, I work with people one-to-one, and it's something that not a lot of people do, or if they do it, they don't do it well enough. So an example I think of is a client I worked with recently, and I posed to him that question. And he said, well, you know what, I've always wanted to go, and I've always wanted to live on a yacht in the Caribbean. I was like, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. Why would you want to do that? Oh, it'd just be awesome, you know, like the weather's great. Yeah, no, but like why? And I couldn't get it out of him. And what I realized is that his perspective hadn't shifted. So I knew he was quite creative, so I kept these different scenarios, and I can't remember the exact one I came up with. It was some weird sort of story that I almost started going down this story, and I could see him vividly imagining it. And then all of a sudden he was like, oh yeah, actually, well maybe I'll just live on the yacht for like a month. And then I've always wanted to make short films. And I was like, all right, well, you know, why do you want to do that? And we got down to it, and it turned out that, you know, he wanted to leave a legacy. He wanted to make people think through his work, and all of these things, these sort of higher values. And he started applying that to his own life straight away, and all of a sudden he was happier. His perspective just shifted, and then he was sort of doing what he loved, because he realized that he just applied that to his own life now. So how does this help us, you know, be more fulfilled in our work? And I think one of the things that we obviously all have, or the people that work in the creative industries have in common as a value, is creativity, and the importance of creativity and why it's important to us, but specifically in line with our values. So authentic creativity, which I define as creativity driven by passion, purpose, and values. And when I say that, I mean opposed to creativity that I've experienced a lot, which is just driven purely by financial gain. Now, I know that obviously it's got to make money, otherwise there wouldn't be a creative industry. But there is a big difference, and I think we all know it, and we all know when we're doing work that's driven purely by financial gain versus work that we really care about, that we're really passionate about. Now, I've worked on both sides of the fence, as in I've been an employee and I've also employed people, or, you know, contracted people. So I know that this balance between fulfilling a brief and giving people the freedom to actually do what they want on their own terms is difficult. But one of the things I find that I think we do is we get caught up in the details. We get caught up in these sort of like surface wants and desires. And we focus on really, really specific things, and we say, oh, we can't do that within the parameters that we've got, we just can't do that. You just got to make a sacrifice. But actually, if we ask why we want this surface want or desire, then that's when we can uncover the value or the need behind it. And that actually is the thing that leads to fulfillment and makes us happy and makes us live those higher needs. And so this is a sort of real life example. Someone that I worked with recently said, I want more authority at work. I said, okay, have you spoken to your bosses about it? They said, yeah, they said, oh, well, if I work hard, I can get a promotion. Or I can have more decisions. And I said, well, yeah, that sounds all right. And she's like, nah, I'm still not happy. And so we went down the why route. Well, why? Why are you not happy? Why? And eventually it came down to the fact that she wanted significance and she wanted respect and she didn't feel like she was getting that at work. And I said, but what does that look like to you? What's your version of significance and respect? And her version of significance and respect were really simple things, like the project managers acknowledging the work that she was doing and seeing the difference that she was making in the clients she was working with and seeing the work that she was doing actually making a difference. And I said, well, surely that's quite easy to achieve. And it was, and she went back and she had a conversation with her bosses and they just made some small changes. She didn't even need a promotion. They were going to give her more money. They didn't even need to give her more money. And she didn't even really make that many more decisions because we identified the thing that she really wanted, the underlying value behind it. So that sort of brings me on to company values, and I think that's really important. And a lot of people talk about company values. And sometimes in smaller companies it's really obvious, but in larger companies maybe not so much. But also client values. Like, I know if that many people work in the creative industries, I can almost guarantee that some of us have had clients that we just end up hating. Like, we just wish that we had never taken that project on in the first place. And we're just like, why did I do that? This is just, I just wish I'd never done that. And essentially that comes down to alignment of values. If your values as a company are, right, we want creative freedom and we want people to respect our decisions, but your clients want you to jump through hoops and they want you to just be the tools and they want to make all decisions, then your values aren't aligned and you're never gonna get on. And I'd say the best advice to that is just don't work with them. And it's easy to fall into that trap of going, well, we need the money, we need to make that turnover, but the amount of time and effort that you end up spending on that client is never actually worth the money you make on it. And that Google is one of the people that I love to use as an example of that. And people always say, oh, we haven't got as much money as Google. We can't do the things they do. But if you read about Google and if you actually research Google and you listen to some of their interviews, it's not actually about the perks. All of this stuff that you see, all of the decals and all of the slides and see, that's all just really like the icing on the cake. If you look at what they do for their employees at base level, it's all about their values. It's all about how they value their employees, what's important to them. And all of their perks are built around that. They're built around, if family is important to you, then here are certain perks for maternity leave, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so really you don't have to have as much money as Google. You can just implement that straight away and that will make things 10 times better than it is if you just say, oh, guess what? We've got a new pool table. We've got a new table tennis table. I probably could have put myself down as a semi-professional table tennis player at that first company I worked at. I played so much table tennis, but I wasn't happy. I played it because I didn't want to be doing the work that I was doing. Oh, I forgot this was on film. They might be able to do me for that. So basically, I'd say takeaways from this, change your perspective to identify what you really want. And that's important. And you can do that, like I said, by asking the right questions and really sort of getting into your own head and thinking about it and visualizing it. Like I said, we're all creative. We all have that ability to think creatively. So make whatever story you need in your head to really imagine what it would be like. And then ask yourself why. And that is the most important thing, why you want those things. Because I thought I uncovered what I wanted, but it wasn't until I went and started doing it that I realized it wasn't actually what I wanted. And I'm sure we've all been in familiar situations like that. We've set ourselves goals, we've had targets, and we say, oh, when I get that, I'll be happy. Or when I do X, Y, and Z, I'll be happy. But then when we get there, we sort of think, oh, is that all there is? What's next? And that's because we're not really identifying the values behind those goals. And then find the ways to live values within the parameters of that situation. That goes back to the example that I said earlier. So it's not about saying, oh, well, you're going to die, so quick, let's all go traveling and do as much stuff as we can possible. It's about saying, what would you do then? And then going back to that and applying it now to the life you're living now and actually living those values on a daily basis. And then the fourth thing is to be more authentically creative. And the reason I say that is because I think we all know that if you have a company or an organization or an event, whatever it is, where everyone's values are aligned and everyone's being authentically creative in terms of they're doing it because they're passionate about it and because that they have similar values, that's when amazing things get achieved. So if you want to find out a bit more about what I'm doing at Creative Life, follow us on Twitter, that's the website, and my email. Thanks very much for listening.